I am sorry, but she is just dead weight now, my daughter-in-law said, her voice carrying across the driveway as she tossed my photo albums into a rusted truck. My son did not say a word. They believed I was helpless, a frail widow with nothing left to offer. They had no clue that the woman they were discarding was secretly worth more than $8 million. I just watched them dig their own graves. My name is Eleanor Graves, at 56 years old. I had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of Ashwood Ridge. It was a town where secrets usually died of old age, buried under the roots of ancient oaks. I had spent decades building a fortress of solitude here, especially after my tenure at Northcrest Holdings. I had requested a leave of absence, a simple week away to recalibrate my mind after a grueling quarter, seeking only the stillness of my lake house. I drove down the gravel lane with the expectation of silence. I found chaos instead. A rusted flatbed truck idled in my driveway. Its engine sputtered a thick, grey smoke that hung low in the humid air. I stopped my car just behind the tree line, my heart hammering a warning against my ribs. I watched as my front door swung open. Marlene, my new daughter-in-law, marched out. She carried a box I recognized immediately. It was the cedar chest that held Patrick's old work boots and the few letters he had written me before the accident. She shoved it onto the metal bed of the truck with a careless thud that echoed through the closed windows of my sedan. "Careful with that one." "It is heavy," Lucas said. My son stood by the tailgate. He looked pale. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the next item. "It is just junk." "Lucas," Marlene snapped, wiping sweat from her forehead. "We need the space. If she wanted it, she would have been here to claim it." I felt a cold numbness spread from my fingertips up to my shoulders. That junk was my life. I watched Lucas lift the old quilt rack Patrick had sanded by hand 3 months before he died. I remembered the sawdust in Patrick's hair and the way Lucas, then only 5, had tried to help hold the sandpaper. Now, the adult Lucas was heaving it onto a pile of trash like it meant nothing. He was erasing our history one piece of furniture at a time. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. My hand was steady, a practiced calm from years of high-stakes boardroom negotiations, even though my soul felt like it was being shredded. I pressed record. The lens captured Marlene dragging my favorite reading chair across the porch. The velvet was tearing against the rough wood. "Hurry up," Marlene hissed, before the old hag comes back and starts whining about her precious memories. "Marlene, please," Lucas whispered, looking over his shoulder. She could be back any minute. So what Marlene challenged him, "This is our house now, practically speaking." I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots. The sound was like a gunshot in the heavy afternoon air. Lucas froze. He dropped the box he was holding. It hit the ground and burst open, spilling my vintage tea set onto the dirt. The porcelain shattered. Marlene turned slowly. She did not look guilty. She did not look ashamed. Her eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. She smoothed her blouse and crossed her arms over her chest. There was a challenge in her stance, a territorial aggression that made my stomach turn. She looked at me as if I were the intruder. "Mom," Lucas stammered. We thought you were staying away for another 2 days." I did not answer him. I did not scream. I kept the phone raised, the red recording dot pulsing on the screen. I panned the camera from the broken china on the ground to Lucas's terrified face, And finally, to Marlene's smirk, I was recording the death of my family. Well, Marlene said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Since you are here, you can help us clear out the rest of this clutter. We are making changes. Eleanor. The wind rusted the leaves overhead, but nobody moved. The tension was so thick it felt physical, pressing against my chest. I looked at the shattered teacup near Lucas's boot. It was the one I used to drink from while I balanced the checkbook late at night, trying to figure out how to feed a growing boy on a minimum wage salary. Now that boy was standing there, letting a stranger destroy me. I lowered the phone, but did not stop recording. I simply stared at them, cataloguing every micro-expression, every ounce of betrayal. They thought they were breaking me. They had no idea they were just waking me up. I looked at Lucas, but I did not see the man standing by the truck. I saw a 7-year-old boy in a black suit that was 2 sizes too big, holding my hand so tight his knuckles turned white. That was the day we buried Patrick. My husband had gone to work at the shipyard one morning and never came back. A crane malfunction took him from us in a split second, leaving me with a mortgage, a broken heart, and a son who needed me to be invincible. I became a machine after that. I worked the morning shift at a diner and the night shift cleaning offices, all while studying for my finance certifications in the brief hours between. I remembered the smell of bleach and stale coffee that seemed permanently etched into my skin. Every single dollar I saved was a victory against the poverty that tried to drown us. This lake house was not just property. It was the finish line of a marathon I had run on bleeding feet. I bought it with cash I had scraped together over 20 years, a sanctuary where I could finally breathe. Mommy, when I grow up, I am going to buy you a whole castle, Lucas had told me once, sitting on the floor of our cramped apartment, counting pennies with me. I do not need a castle. Lucas, I had whispered back, kissing his forehead. I just need you. He was my world. He was the reason I climbed the ladder at Northcrest Holdings from the very bottom, swallowing my pride and fighting for every promotion just so he could have braces, college tuition, and a decent car. He was supposed to be my legacy. Then, he met Marlene. She appeared 2 years ago like a storm disguised as a summer breeze. She was beautiful. I could not deny that. She had hair like spun gold and eyes that could assess the value of a room in 5 seconds. But her background was a blur of vague consulting jobs and stories that never quite lined up. The first time she came to the lake house, she did not look at the view or the family photos. She looked at the worn floorboards with a sneer she thought I did not see. It is quaint, Marlene had said, the word tasting like vinegar in her mouth. But do you not think you should sell? The market is high right now. Eleanor, you could get a condo. Something smaller, easier for someone your age to manage. I had laughed it off then. I told myself she was just being practical. I wanted Lucas to be happy. So I swallowed my irritation. I cooked them dinner. I listened to Marlene brag about expensive vacations and high society friends I had never met. I ignored the way she kicked me under the table metaphorically, making little jabs about my off-brand clothes or my 10-year-old car. Lucas deserves the best, she would say, clutching his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. And we have such big plans. I did not realize those plans involved erasing me. After the wedding, the calls from Lucas became shorter. He stopped coming for Sunday dinner. When he did visit, the conversation always drifted to assets, wills, and estate planning. It was subtle at first, like water seeping into a basement foundation. Marlene would ask about the deed to the house. Lucas would ask if I had enough retirement savings, his eyes darting away when I answered, "We just worry about you." "Mum?" Lucas had said a month ago, "You are all alone out here. What if something happens?" "I am fine." "Lucas," I had assured him, "I am strong." "But are you?" Marlene had interjected, her voice smooth and cold. Memory slips happen. Accidents happen. Now, standing in the driveway, watching my son refuse to meet my gaze, the pieces finally clicked together. They did not see a mother. They saw an obstacle. The darkness had not just entered my home today, it had been invited in by my own son months ago. I looked at the shattered teacup again. It was not just porcelain that was broken. It was the promise of that little boy who said he would build me a castle. He was not building me a castle. He was helping a stranger kick me out of my own home. I forced the tremble in my hands to stop. The mother in me wanted to weep for the boy I had lost. But the auditor in me, the woman who had spent 30 years detecting fraud at Northcrest Holdings, took the wheel. I needed to stop reacting and start analyzing. I took a deep breath and let the cold logic that had defined my career wash over the heat of my betrayal. I began to replay the last 6 months, not as a doting mother, but as an investigator reviewing a suspicious file. The warning signs had been there. I had just been too blinded by love to see them. I remembered a dinner 3 weeks ago. Lucas had been unusually fidgety. He had poured me a second glass of wine, something he never did. "Mom?" he had asked, avoiding my eyes. "Where do you keep the deed to the house now? Is it still in the safety deposit box? Or did you move it to the home safe? Why do you ask?" "Lucas," I had replied. "Just safety reasons," he had stammered. "You know, in case of a fire." It was a clumsy probe. Then there was the incident with Marlene last Sunday. I had come out of the shower to find her standing directly in front of my home office door, her hand hovering over the knob. When she saw me, she had jumped as if she had been burned. I was just looking for the bathroom. She had lied, her smile tight and unconvincing. This house is such a maze. The bathroom was down the hall in the completely opposite direction. She had been trying to find my files. I walked past them, ignoring their bickering, and went into the kitchen. I needed to verify a suspicion. 2 days ago, I had received a strange voicemail on my landline while I was out in the garden. A man from a company called Miller Construction had left a message asking to confirm the date for the remodeling walkthrough. I had assumed it was a wrong number and deleted it. Now, I knew better. They were not just planning to move in, they were planning to renovate and flip my home. I looked out the kitchen window toward the neighbor's house. Mrs. Gable was in her garden. She had mentioned something to me in passing just yesterday, something I had dismissed. I saw Lucas here on Tuesday. She had told me over the fence. He had a man with him. They walked all around the perimeter. I thought you were home, but the car was gone. Lucas had told me he was at work on Tuesday. He had lied. He had brought an appraiser or a contractor to my house without my permission. I walked to the counter where I kept my mail. I picked up a bank statement that had arrived yesterday. I had not opened it yet, or so I thought. I held the envelope up to the light. The flap was slightly wrinkled. The glue was inconsistent. Someone had steamed it open, read it, and glued it back shut. They were tracking my liquidity. They wanted to know how much cash I had access to in my local accounts. I pulled out my phone again and logged into my banking app. I navigated to the security settings. My breath hitched. There were 5 failed login attempts in the last 48 hours. The IP address originated right here in Ashwood Ridge. They had tried to crack my password. The picture was complete. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision by an overwhelmed young couple. This was a hostile takeover. They had scoped out the asset, estimated the value, and were now executing the acquisition by force. They were banking on me being a weak, emotional old woman who would crumble under pressure and sign whatever paper they put in front of her. Eleanor Marlene's voice screeched from the front yard. "Are you hiding in there?" I stared at the screen of my phone. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. But I would not fight with shouting and tears. I would fight with leverage. I realized that if I confronted them with everything now, they might retreat and try a different, more legalistic angle that could tie me up in court for years. No, I needed to catch them in the act of a felony. I needed to make them think they were winning. I put the phone in my pocket and smoothed my skirt. I would play the part of the confused, overwhelmed victim for exactly 1 hour more. I would let them think I was senile. I would let them think I was breaking. And while they were busy celebrating their victory, I would be tightening the noose around their financial necks. I walked back toward the front door. It was time to set the trap. I stepped onto the porch and simply stood there. I did not scream. I did not demand an explanation for the broken china or the stolen furniture. I just let the silence stretch between us until it became a physical weight. I fixed my eyes on Lucas. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to see the mother who had nursed him through chickenpox and sat up waiting for him to come home from prom. He could not do it. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, staring intently at a crack in the concrete driveway. I saw his jaw tighten. There was a war inside him, a battle between the son I raised and the husband he had become. But it was clear which side was winning. He was a coward. "Oh, stop staring at him like that," Marlene snapped, stepping between us. She blocked my view of my son, acting as a shield for his conscience. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Lucas, look at her. She is just standing there blankly. It is the dementia setting in. I do not have dementia." "Marlene," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Do you?" she challenged, pulling a folded document from her purse. "You forgot you told us to come by today. You are forgetting bills. You are hoarding things in this big, empty house while we struggle. It is not safe for you here anymore. Eleanor, you are obviously not well." It was a gaslighting tactic so transparent it almost insulted my intelligence, yet it stung. They were trying to rewrite my reality to suit their greed. "We think it is best if you just let us handle things from now on," Marlene continued, thrusting the paper toward me. "This is just a standard power of attorney. It gives us the right to manage the property and your accounts, so you do not have to worry about the math anymore. You can just rest." I looked at the document. It was not a help. It was a handover. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Marlene laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Then you are just being selfish. But honestly, Eleanor, look at yourself. You are old news. You served your purpose. You raised him, fine. But he is a man now. He has a wife. We do not need you anymore." The words hit me like physical blows. "We do not need you anymore." It was the sentence every parent fears, spoken with malice rather than independence. My chest constricted. For a second, I felt the ground sway beneath me. The grief was so sharp, it felt like a heart attack. I looked past Marlene to Lucas, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say, "Stop." That is my mother." He said nothing. He just kept staring at the ground, letting his wife flay me alive with her words. That silence was the final severance. The cord was cut. I took a slow breath, forcing the tears back into my ducts. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I looked at the paper in Marlene's hand, then up at her smug, victorious face. "I will not sign anything without reading it first," I said. My voice was steady, void of the tremor shaking my insides. "Just sign the damn paper," Marlene hissed, losing her composure. "No," I said. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. "Leave the furniture where it is. I am going inside. Do not disturb me." I closed the door and locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening to Marlene screaming at Lucas outside. The pain in my chest was still there, burning hot. But something else was rising to meet it. It was a cold, hard resolve. They thought they were dealing with a confused old widow. They had forgotten that before I was a mother. I was a shark in a boardroom full of men who wanted to see me fail. They had just woken her up. I locked the heavy oak door of my study and leaned against it, listening to the muffled sounds of my son and his wife arguing in the driveway. They sounded like distant thunder, threatening, but ultimately unable to touch me in this sanctuary. Marlene thought she had broken me. She thought she had cornered a helpless, senile widow who was clinging to her last few possessions. She had no idea that she was trying to rob a vault with a plastic spoon. I walked over to my desk, not the cheap particle board one in the living room where I paid the utility bills, but the mahogany desk in the corner that I kept locked. I pulled a key from a hollowed-out book on the shelf, a copy of Great Expectations, fittingly enough, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a single, black leather portfolio. Lucas believed I was a mid-level clerk at Northcrest Holdings. He thought my 30 years there were spent filing tax returns and making coffee for the bosses. He was so wrong. I was a senior financial advisor, a shark in a tank full of men who constantly underestimated me. 7 years ago, right before I retired, I was the lead strategist for a high-risk venture capital project involving renewable energy infrastructure. The board had offered me a generous severance package in cash. I turned it down. I demanded equity options instead. Eleanor. "Are you sure?" the CEO had asked me then, looking at me like I was gambling my pension away. "That stock is volatile. I will take the risk." I had told him. That stock did not just grow, it exploded. Within 5 years, the value had increased by over 3,000%. I sold at the peak and diversified. I did not tell a soul. Not my friends, not my neighbors, and certainly not Lucas. I wanted him to build his own character. I wanted him to work hard, to understand the value of $1 without the safety net of a trust fund waiting to catch him. I thought I was protecting him from becoming spoiled. Instead, I had inadvertently tested his morality, and he had failed spectacularly. I opened the portfolio. The numbers on the monthly statement were staggering, even to me. My primary investment account held $12,450,000, but that was just the surface. I had 2 offshore accounts, legal but highly private, in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. They were my shadow accounts, created to protect my assets from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. I ran my finger over the balance sheet. $18 million in total assets. I looked out the window. Marlene was kicking the tire of their truck, her face twisted in a mask of greed and frustration. She was fighting tooth and nail destroying a family, and committing elder abuse for a lake house that was worth, at most, $450,000. It was pathetic. It was almost laughable. They were trying to force me into poverty, unaware that I could buy and sell their entire existence before breakfast. A cold rage settled in my stomach. It was not the hot, tearful anger of a mother anymore. It was the calculated, ruthless aggression of a financier who spots a hostile takeover attempt. They wanted control. They wanted to manage my assets. Be careful what you wish for. I reached for my secure satellite phone, a device Lucas had never even seen. I dialed a number that I had not used since the day I walked out of the Northcrest offices. "Make it quick." A gruff voice answered on the second ring. It was Arthur, my personal attorney, and the only other person on earth who knew the extent of my wealth. "It is me." "Arthur," I said. "Eleanor, is everything all right? No?" I said, my voice steady and sharp. "It is time to execute the contingency plan, the sleeping giant protocol." There was a pause on the other end. Arthur knew exactly what that meant. It meant total legal warfare. It meant forensic accounting. It meant unfreezing the assets to prepare for a strike. "Are you sure?" Arthur asked. "Once we start this, there is no going back for Lucas. He will be cut off. He cut himself off the moment he watched his wife throw my husband's ashes into a truck." I replied, "Prepare the papers. And Arthur. I want a full audit of Marlene's finances. I have a feeling she is desperate for money, and I want to know exactly who she owes." "Consider it done," he said. I hung up the phone and looked at the black portfolio one last time before locking it away. My heart was breaking for the son I had lost, but my mind was sharpening for the battle ahead. They wanted to play a game of power. They did not realize they were playing against the house, and the house always wins. I sat across from Arthur Vance in a dimly lit booth at a diner 2 towns over, far away from the prying eyes of Ashwood Ridge. Arthur had been the toughest corporate litigator at Northcrest Holdings, a man who ate fraud cases for breakfast. When I laid the file on the table, the photos of the truck, the audio recordings of Marlene's verbal abuse, and the printed logs of the failed login attempts, his face went from friendly to stone cold. "This is not just family drama." "Eleanor," Arthur said, tapping the photo of the cedar chest being loaded onto the truck. "This is attempted grand larceny and elder abuse. If we go to court, we will bury them." "I do not just want to bury them in paperwork." "Arthur," I replied, taking a sip of black coffee. "I want to make sure they can never hurt anyone like this again. I want everything locked down." We spent the next 2 hours constructing a fortress around my life. I contacted my private bankers in Zurich and Singapore, instructing them to flag any unauthorized inquiries immediately. I implemented a biometric lock on my domestic accounts. If Lucas or Marlene tried to access my funds now, they would hit a digital wall of titanium. But defense was only half the battle. I needed to see just how greedy they really were. When I returned home, I set the trap. I left a folder on the kitchen counter labeled "Pension Fund, Urgent." Inside, I placed a fabricated bank statement showing a balance of $50,000, enough to whet their appetite, but small enough to seem like the last scraps of a dying woman's savings. I went into the garden and waited. Through the open window, I heard the distinctive rustle of papers. "Daniel, look at this." Marlene's voice drifted out, sharp and hungry. 50 grand. I knew the old hag was holding out on us. That covers the credit card debt and the down payment on the BMW. "Put it back." "Marlene," Lucas whispered, sounding frantic. If she sees us? She is out pulling weeds. Marlene scoffed. We need to get her to sign that power of attorney tonight. I am not waiting another day. I smiled grimly at my rose bushes. They had just confirmed two things. First, they were snooping. Second, they were financially underwater. Arthur's background check had come back an hour ago. Marlene was drowning in $70,000 of consumer debt. She viewed me not as a mother-in-law, but as a bailout package. Later that afternoon, while they were out running errands, which I knew meant meeting with their own predatory lawyer, I raided the recycling bin in the garage. I found what I was looking for at the bottom, a crumpled contract from Miller Construction. I smoothed out the paper. At the bottom, next to the line for homeowner signature, was my name. But it was not my signature. The loops on the E were too wide. It was Lucas's handwriting. My heart ached, a dull throb of maternal grief. But I forced it down. My son had committed forgery. He had signed away my home for a renovation I never authorized. This was the final nail in their legal coffin. I walked next door to see Mrs. Gable. She was an insomniac who spent her nights watching the neighborhood from her front porch. When I asked her if she would be willing to testify about the strange men Lucas had brought to the house while I was gone, she did not hesitate. Honey, I saw them measuring the windows, Mrs. Gable said, patting my hand. I thought it was odd. Marlene was out there pointing at your garden like she was planning to pave it over. You just say the word, and I will tell the judge everything. By dinner time. The atmosphere in the house had shifted. I sat at the table and ate my soup in total silence. I did not ask Lucas about his day. I did not look at Marlene. I simply existed, calm and unreachable. Mom, Lucas asked, his voice cracking slightly. You are quiet tonight. I continued to eat, my spoon clinking softly against the bowl. Eleanor? We really need to discuss the future. Marlene pressed, though I noticed a bead of sweat on her temple. The house is just too much work for you. I finally looked up. I stared right into Marlene's eyes, holding her gaze until she blinked and looked away. I offered no argument, no defense, no emotion. I was a mirror reflecting their own guilt back at them. I am ready for the future, I said softly. More than you know. They exchanged a nervous glance. My silence was terrifying them more than my screaming ever could. They could sense the shift in power, but they were too arrogant to realize that the ground beneath their feet was already gone. They were waiting for me to break. I was just waiting for the ink to dry on the subpoenas. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only illuminated the battlefield. At 10 o'clock sharp, Lucas and Marlene marched into my kitchen, flanking a man I had never met. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car and carried a leather briefcase with an air of practiced arrogance. This was their lawyer, a man presumably hired to bully an old widow into submission. Marlene looked triumphant, her chin held high, while Lucas refused to look at the photos of his father on the mantel. They sat across from me at the oak dining table, the same table where I had once helped Lucas with his algebra homework. Mrs. Graves. My name is Mr. Sterling. The lawyer began, sliding a thick document toward me without a greeting. My clients feel that due to your declining capacity, it is in your best interest to sign over the deed to this property immediately. We are prepared to offer you a monthly stipend for a care facility, provided you cooperate without litigation. Marlene smirked, tapping her manicured nails on the wood. It is a generous offer. Eleanor, Take it. You do not want to end up with nothing. I looked at the document. It was a complete asset transfer. They were not just asking for the house, they were asking for my life. I did not reach for a pen. Instead, I reached for my smartphone, which was resting face down on the table. Before we discuss my capacity, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice calm and level, I think you should hear something. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear in the silent kitchen. It was the recording I had made yesterday from the pantry. Marlene's voice, shrill and cruel, filled the room. If she would just, get too tired and pass on in her sleep, this would all be so much easier. No lawyers, no messy signatures. The colour drained from Marlene's face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mr. Sterling stiffened in his chair. He looked from the phone to his client, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine alarm. That is taken out of context. Marlene shrieked, her voice cracking. Is it? I asked. What about this context? I reached into a manila envelope and spread 5 glossy 8x10 photographs across the table. They were high-definition stills from the video I recorded on the day of my return. They clearly showed Marlene dragging my furniture across the driveway and Lucas loading it onto the truck. The final photo was a close-up of the Miller construction contract with the forged signature. That is your handwriting, isn't it? Lucas, I asked softly. Lucas looked at the photo of the contract. His hands began to tremble violently. He looked at the lawyer, then at me, his eyes wide with the sudden, terrifying realization that he was not looking at his mother anymore. He was looking at a plaintiff. Mom. I didn't mean... Lucas stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Mr. Sterling pulled the document back toward himself. He closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. You told me this was a consensual transfer due to medical necessity. You did not tell me there was evidence of theft and forgery. I cannot represent you in this matter if you have committed fraud. Fraud? Marlene yelled, turning on Lucas. You said she was senile. You said she would not notice. You told me to sign the loan application because the house was practically ours. This is your fault. Lucas, you are the one who... Stop talking, Lucas shouted, his voice breaking. Just stop. The room descended into chaos. They were turning on each other. Rats trapped in a sinking ship. Marlene was screaming about debt, exposing her own financial desperation, while Lucas sat with his head in his hands, shaking. I sat perfectly still. I did not yell. I did not cry. I watched them unravel with the cold detachment of a judge passing a sentence. I took a sip of my tea. The china clinked softly in the lull between their screams. Mr. Sterling, I said, cutting through the noise. I suggest you advise your clients to leave my house. Immediately. Before I call the sheriff and add criminal trespassing to the list of charges. Marlene glared at me with pure hatred. But the fear behind her eyes was undeniable. She knew she had lost. But she did not know that this was only the beginning. I was not just going to defend my home. I was going to dismantle their greed piece by piece. They had come for my money. Now, I was going to show them exactly what that money could do. The room was thick with the smell of fear and cheap cologne. Mr. Sterling was already packing his briefcase, eager to distance himself from the sinking ship that was my son and daughter-in-law. Marlene was still trembling, her face a blotchy mess of red indignation and white terror. Lucas stared at his knees, defeated. They thought the worst part was over. They thought the threat of jail was the climax of their punishment. I almost felt sorry for them because they had no idea that I was about to drop the real guillotine. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through the shuffling of papers. "Before you go, there is one more thing you need to see. Since we are discussing assets, we should lay all the cards on the table." I reached into my bag and pulled out the black leather portfolio. It was heavy, not in weight, but in significance. I placed it gently on the table and slid it toward the center, right between Lucas's sweating hands and Marlene's clenched fists. "Open it," I commanded. Lucas hesitated, looking at me like I was handing him a live grenade. Slowly. He reached out and flipped the cover open. His eyes scanned the summary page. I watched the blood drain from his face until he looked like a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He just stared at the number at the bottom of the page. "What is it?" Marlene snapped, snatching the folder from him. "What is—" Oh my God. Her voice strangled in her throat. She stared at the document, her eyes bulging. $12,450,000. She whispered, reading the figure aloud as if her brain refused to process it. This is a mistake. This cannot be yours. You worked in a cubicle." "I was a senior financial advisor. Marlene," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I made millions for other people for 30 years. Did you really think I did not make any for myself? You assumed I was a poor, simple old woman because it suited your narrative. But the truth is, you never knew who I was. You never asked." Mr. Sterling stopped halfway to the door. He turned around, his eyes widening as he looked at the folder. "That account is just the liquid assets," I continued, enjoying the absolute silence that had fallen over the room. "With my offshore holdings and the diversified portfolio, the total estate is valued at over $18 million. Marlene let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She slumped back in her chair, the folder slipping from her fingers. The realization was hitting her like a freight train. She had committed fraud, alienated her husband from his mother, and risked prison for a lake house worth $400,000 when she was sitting across from an $18 million inheritance. She had gambled for pennies and lost a fortune. We would have had all of this." Marlene choked out, tears finally spilling over. They were not tears of remorse. They were tears of greed, mourning a loss. "Lucas would have," I corrected her coldly. "I had set up a trust. It was going to mature on his 40th birthday. It would have taken care of you for generations." Lucas looked up at me. His eyes were red, filled with a mixture of awe and absolute horror. "Mom, I didn't know." "Because you were too busy trying to declare me incompetent to ask," I said. I pulled one final document from my bag. This one was fresh, typed up by Arthur only hours ago. "This is an amendment to my will," I said, sliding it toward Lucas. "It cuts you out completely. Not a single cent. The money goes to charity. The house goes to a land trust. You get nothing." Lucas flinched as if I had slapped him. "However," I added, my voice dropping to a whisper, "there is a clause, a reinstatement clause. I am willing to leave you a small stipend, enough to start over, but only under one condition." I pointed a finger at Marlene. "You divorce her," I said. "You annul this marriage. You cut her out of your life just as ruthlessly as she tried to cut me out of mine. If you stay with her, you are disinherited forever." The room went dead silent. Marlene stopped crying. She turned her head slowly to look at Lucas. For the first time, she did not look at him with ownership. She looked at him with fear. Lucas looked at the document, then at the millions of dollars in the portfolio, and finally at his wife. I saw the gears turning in his head. I saw the doubt. I saw him remember every time she called me a hag, every time she pushed him to lie, every time she spent money they did not have. "Lucas," Marlene whispered, her voice trembling. "Baby, she is lying. She is trying to split us up. Tell her. Tell her to go to hell." Lucas did not tell me to go to hell. He looked at Marlene. And for the first time in 2 years, his eyes were not full of love. They were full of calculation. $18 million, Lucas muttered, his voice barely audible. The foundation of their marriage cracked right there in my kitchen. I watched it happen. I watched the love die, replaced by the cold, hard weight of a fortune lost. They were finished, and I had not even raised my voice. Marlene's scream shattered the tension in the room like a hammer hitting glass. It was not a cry of despair. It was the primal, enraged shriek of a predator realizing it had walked into a cage. She lunged across the table, knocking over the pitcher of iced tea. The liquid pooled across the oak surface, dripping onto the floor. But she did not care. Her eyes were wild, fixed on me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. You witch," she screamed, her face turning a violent shade of crimson. "You planned this. You sat there and watched us struggle while you were sitting on $18 million. You sick, twisted old woman. You owe us. You owe Lucas. I owe Lucas, a mother who raised him right." I replied calmly, not moving an inch. "I do not owe him a fortune to squander on your vanity." "This is entrapment," Marlene yelled, spinning around to face her lawyer. "Mr. Sterling, do something. Sue her, she led us on. She committed emotional fraud." "Mr." Sterling stood up, snapping his briefcase shut with finality. He looked at Marlene with undisguised disdain. "Mrs. Graves, there is no such thing as emotional fraud," he said coldly. "However, there is such a thing as attempted extortion and forgery. My legal advice to you, as of this moment, is to vacate these premises immediately before the sheriff arrives. I am terminating my representation of you. Do not call my office." He walked out the back door without looking back. His departure seemed to suck the last bit of oxygen out of the room. Lucas remained seated, his head in his hands. He was making a low, keening sound, like a wounded animal. "Lucas, get up," Marlene hissed, grabbing his shoulder. "Do not just sit there. We need to figure this out. We can fight this. If we get a better lawyer." Lucas stood up, but he did not look at her. He looked at me. His eyes were red and hollow. The realization of what he had done and what he had lost was crashing down on him. He had traded a mother's love and a legacy of millions for a woman who was currently screaming about lawsuits. "I lost everything," Lucas whispered. "Mom, I am so sorry. Save it." "Lucas," I said, "get out of my house." They stumbled out the front door into the bright, unforgiving daylight, but they did not find privacy. Half the neighborhood had gathered on the sidewalk. Mrs. Gable was there, arms crossed, standing with the mailman and the couple from across the street. In a small town like Ashwood Ridge, news travelled faster than light. Everyone knew the police were coming. Everyone knew Lucas and Marlene were trying to steal my house. Look at them. I heard Mrs. Gable say loud enough for them to hear. Vultures. Picked the wrong carcass. Marlene tried to shield her face with her purse, but the shame was inescapable. She turned to Lucas, her panic rising again. "Lucas! Wait!" she pleaded, reaching for his arm. "We can fix this. We just need to go to my sister's house. We can start over." Lucas looked at her hand on his arm. For the first time, he seemed to see her claws. He saw the woman who had isolated him, lied to him, and turned him into a criminal. He violently shoved her away. Marlene stumbled back, almost tripping over the curb. "Don't touch me," Lucas roared, his voice cracking. "You did this. You said she was senile. You said it was illegal. You destroyed my life. I did it for us." Marlene shrieked back. "There is no us." Lucas yelled, "I am done. I am done with you." A squad car pulled up to the curb, its lights flashing silently. 2 deputies stepped out. They were not here to arrest them yet, but to file the report for the restraining order and the trespassing incident I had reported earlier. The sight of the uniforms was the final blow. Marlene collapsed onto the grass, sobbing hysterically, while Lucas stood there, pale and shaking, watching his world burn. The fallout in the weeks that followed was swift and brutal. The investigation into the forged Miller construction contract opened a Pandora's box of Marlene's financial history. The police discovered she had falsified income statements on 3 different loan applications. She was facing felony charges for bank fraud. Lucas did not fare much better. The scandal was too juicy for a small town to ignore. The rumours reached his employer, a conservative insurance firm, within days. They fired him for conduct unbecoming, citing the reputational risk of employing a man under investigation for elder abuse and forgery. They lost their apartment. They lost their cars. And true to his word, Lucas filed for divorce. But it was too little, too late. They were both left with nothing, no money, no reputation, and no family. They had tried to break me to build their future. Instead, they had broken themselves against the wall of my resilience. I watched from my window as their lives unspooled, feeling not joy, but a deep, quiet relief that the cancer in my family had finally been cut out. The lake was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the burning orange and purple hues of the setting sun. I sat in my favourite rocking chair, the one Marlene had tried to drag across the pavement just 3 weeks ago. It creaked rhythmically, a soothing sound that replaced the shouting and the chaos that had plagued this house. I took a sip of tea and looked out at the water. It was the same view I had stared at the day Patrick died, feeling like my world had ended. Now, looking at it, I felt like my world was beginning again. Arthur had called me at 9 o'clock this morning. "It is finished. Eleanor," he had said, his voice warm with professional satisfaction. "The investigation is closed. The restraining orders are permanent. Your assets are locked down so tight that not even the government could get in without a warrant. You are safe. Thank you. Arthur," I had whispered, "for everything." On the small table beside me lay a handwritten letter. It had arrived yesterday, postmarked from a town 40 miles away. I did not need to see the signature to know who wrote it. The handwriting was messy, just like it had been when he was a boy. It was from Lucas. I had read it once, and only once. He wrote about his regret. He wrote about how Marlene had twisted his mind. how he had been weak, and how he missed me every single day. I just want my mom back. The letter ended. I folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. I did not burn it, but I did not reach for a pen to reply. I was not holding a grudge. I was holding a boundary. Forgiveness is a gift, but access to my life is a privilege. And he had lost that privilege when he signed his name on a forged contract. I chose peace over the exhausted duty of fixing him. He was a grown man. He had to fix himself. I had made other decisions too. I met with my financial team yesterday. I did not need $18 million to be happy. I needed security. Yes, but I did not need an empire. I transferred $12 million into a newly formed charitable trust. It was named the Patrick Graves Initiative. Its sole mission was to provide high-end legal defense for elderly women who were being financially abused by their families. I would use the money they tried to steal from me to protect thousands of other women just like me. However, I was still a grandmother. I could not turn off that part of my heart. I set up 2 blind trust funds for the grandchildren I hoped to meet one day. Lucas would never know they existed. He would never be able to touch a cent. But if he ever raised children, and if those children grew up to be decent, kind human beings, they would find themselves taken care of when they turned 30 years old. It was my secret insurance policy for the future of my bloodline. As for the wreckage left behind, it was clearing. Marlene had fled Ashwood Ridge in the middle of the night. The shame was too heavy to carry in a town where every cashier and gas station attendant knew what she had done. She was gone, leaving behind a ruined credit score and a reputation that would follow her like a shadow. Lucas was working at a lumber yard in the next county. He was living in a studio apartment, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and learning for the first time in his life what it meant to survive without a safety net. It broke my heart to know he was struggling, but I knew it was the only way he would ever learn. He was starting over with empty hands, just like I did when his father died. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. I realized then that my victory was not in the millions of dollars sitting in the bank. It was not in the lawsuit or the triumph over Marlene. My strength came from the moment I stood in that driveway and decided that I mattered. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to write me off as a footnote in their own story of greed. But they forgot that I was the author of this book. I watched the last sliver of the sun disappear below the horizon. The darkness did not scare me anymore. I had walked through the fire and come out unburned. I was Eleanor Graves. I was alone. But I was not lonely. I was free. And as the first star appeared in the twilight sky, I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. The war was over, and I was the last one standing. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on how I handled things. Do not forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people.